Hello everyone, and welcome once again to Caleb Likes Books. Today I'm going to be doing a book tag, which I have not done before. This is a video that I saw Elliot Brooks did recently. You should go check out her channel, she's really cool. And she recently did the mid-year book tag, which essentially is a list of questions that you can answer for all your different book opinions for the first half of this year. And so I saw that and I thought it sounded fun, so I'm going to do it. And before I actually start answering these questions, I have placed a limit on myself, and that being that I cannot mention the same book twice. So if there is a particular book that I answer one question for, then I am not allowed to say it for an answer for a different question. And this also means, like, if I would say the same book for two different questions, I have to pick the one that I feel more strongly about answering for it. So that's the only rule that I'm setting in place for this list. So first up, the first question is your favorite book of the year so far. So my answer for this, I had a couple options for this one because my favorite book that I read this year is a sequel. The next question is about sequels. So I was thinking, should I include it for sequels or favorite book? But I am going to include it for my favorite book. So I'm going to say Words of Radiance by Brandon Sanderson. Unsurprisingly, is my favorite book that I've read so far this year. Way of Kings was my favorite last year, so Words of Radiance is my favorite this year. I'm going to be reading Oathbringer here in a couple months, so I'm curious if Oathbringer and Words of Radiance are going to be fighting for my favorite by the end of the year. We'll see how that goes. Maybe even if I get to Rhythm of War as well, that would be interesting to see which one I end up picking if I had to read all of those three. But yeah, Words of Radiance was amazing. I loved everything about it. I would say I very, very slightly prefer Way of Kings, but Words of Radiance has so many incredible and memorable moments, some great character development, a really interesting storyline, some great world building, lots of questions that are being answered, and still some more that are being posed to the reader, and it's just wonderful. It's just as good as The Way of Kings, in my opinion, even though I do very slightly subjectively prefer that book because Kaladin's story in that book really resonated with me, but Words of Radiance is equally incredible. The next one is the best sequel that you read this year. So obviously, this Words of Radiance would have been my answer for this one, but since I am only allowing myself to pick one book one time, for this I am actually going to say Thrawn Alliances by Timothy Zahn. This is the second book of the canon Star Wars Thrawn trilogy. This one, I don't know that it would be a very popular pick because a lot of times people that I have seen tend to consider Alliances the least favorite, but Alliances was actually my favorite of the bunch. I really loved this book, and I loved the dual storylines of it. There's a storyline taking place in the past as well as the present, with Thrawn and Darth Vader, as well as Thrawn and Anakin Skywalker, which I thought both of those were fantastic. Really enjoyed those. I love the characterization of Thrawn. I really enjoy him in these new Thrawn books. I'm excited to see when I read the Thrawn Ascendancy books how I'm going to feel about him after that. And yeah, this was, aside from Words of Radiance, this was probably my favorite sequel. So these next two questions are about 2023 releases. So the first one is a new release that I have not read yet, but I want to. And for this one, I'm going to say The High Republic in general, that I haven't read the Star Wars The High Republic books. Those being Cataclysm, Battle of Jedi, which I might read. I haven't decided for sure if I'm going to, but I've heard that I maybe should, as well as Path of Vengeance. Those three books I still have to read. And so that's going to be my answer for that. I've been loving The High Republic. It's one of my favorite things to come out of Star Wars ever. One of my favorite Star Wars book series. And I just haven't read the last few books yet. But I need to. The next one is a book that is still yet to release later in the year that I am excited for. I don't remember if more High Republic is coming out at the end of this year or not, but I am going to pick the remaining two Secret Projects by Brandon Sanderson because they're both in the Cosmere. The concept for both of them sounds really cool. And so those are my picks. The next one is my biggest disappointment of the year so far. So for this one, I have two picks. I know I'm cheating, but one of these was a DNF, and the other one I did finish, but it was also a disappointment. So the DNF was The Shadow Rising by Robert Jordan, which wasn't really a disappointment, I would say, but I just didn't really feel like finishing it. So I'm saying it for that reason. But as far as a book that was actually like really disappointing for me, I would say Convergence by Zoraida Cordova. This was the last High Republic book that I read. And this was one of the only High Republic books so far that I have actually not really cared for all that much. Most of the other ones I've at least liked, if not loved. And this was, I would say, one of two High Republic books so far that I have just felt extremely, underwhelmed by. It wasn't terrible. It wasn't even bad. I would say it wasn't even necessarily mediocre. It was just one that I kind of read and wasn't quite into. The next question is the biggest surprise of the year so far. For this one, I'm going to say the Edge of Victory duology by Greg Keyes. These are two Star Wars New Jedi Order books. I'm listing a lot of Star Wars books on here, apparently. These ones, it's mostly, I have enjoyed the New Jedi Order in its entirety so far, but I haven't absolutely, loved any of the books except maybe Vector Prime, and maybe one of the other ones, but even those were still, I really enjoyed them, but they weren't, absolutely incredible for me, whereas I did really love these two books, especially the first one in the duology. So I would say that was the biggest surprise, not because I didn't expect to enjoy it, but I didn't expect to enjoy it on the level that I did. The next one is my favorite new author. This one I'm editing a little bit because this question implies that it has to be an author who released a debut novel this year. I have not read any of those, so I'm going to edit this question to my favorite author that I read a book for the first time this year. And for that, there actually is not very many. There's only a couple. But the one that I'm going to pick is going to be John Gwynne, which is kind of funny because at the time I'm recording this video, I just started reading Shadow of the Gods, which is my first John Gwynne book. And I've only read the first 50 or 60 pages at this point. But because he's one of, if not the only he's not the only first-time author that I read this year, but he's one of only a couple that I've read this year. And I am really liking Shadow of the Gods so far, even though I've only read a very small portion of it. I am going to pick him. The next question is my new fictional crush, which I am not going to answer because I frankly don't have an answer for it. So I'm just going to skip over that, but I'm going to answer the next one, which is my newest favorite character from a book. This one I'm cheating very, very slightly because it's a character that I have already read, but it's one that is kind of new. And that's Thrawn from the canon Thrawn books. And the reason why I call this one a little weird is because I've read several Thrawn books from Star Wars Legends, which is separate from the canon. But the canon version of Thrawn I only just read this year. So I'm only talking about the canon version of Thrawn here. But I really love the canon version of Thrawn. I prefer him over Legends Thrawn at the moment. I just love how the first canon Thrawn trilogy really develops his character, really goes more into who he is, and expands more on his character. In Legends, I always felt like he was, he was a good character, but he was never one of my favorites because I felt like you never really got in his head, you never really got to see him especially as a character. You really only got to see him as a military leader for the most part, from what I've read at least. Whereas in the canon Thrawn books, you really get to know him more as a character. And so that's the reason why I'm picking him as my new favorite character. Next, we have another pairing of questions, this time for emotional reactions to books. So first, we have a book that made me cry. I don't often cry when reading books. Sometimes I will get that really emotional feeling, which is what I'm more basing this off, but I don't typically cry when I'm reading books. But the one that I felt the most emotional about was Words of Radiance. But the second that I would say that for a book that I haven't mentioned already, is another Brandon Sanderson book, funnily enough. There's going to be a ton of Brandon Sanderson and Star Wars on this list, apparently. I apologize if it seems very focused on just those couple things, but that's what I've been really liking this year, so I'm sorry, but that's how it is. But I'm going to pick Shadows of Self, the second Mistborn Era 2 book. The ending of this book hit me so hard. I'm not going to spoil what it is because if you haven't read it, I don't want to spoil it for you. But the thing that happens to Wax at the end of this book, oh man, it broke me a little bit. It was such a good moment. It was so emotional. It was so heartbreaking, but it was so good. So that is going to be my pick for the saddest, the most likely to have made me cry moment, I guess I'll say. Next, we have the book that made me the happiest, which again is a Brandon Sanderson book. Again, sorry, but maybe you happen to love Brandon Sanderson and Star Wars books, so maybe this is fine for you. So if that's the case, yay. This is going to be Tress of the Emerald Sea. I could also mention Mort by Terry Pratchett, which probably I would say if I were counting in terms of like laughs per page, because Terry Pratchett from the 2 books I've read so far is just constant funny for the most part. But Tress was also very, very funny, and it was just such a fun, lighthearted, feel-good book. You know, this is one of the most feel-good books that I've read, where I just read it and it was just such a joy to read. And I just felt very happy, and it was lots of fun. Very funny book as well, lots of great jokes and little things here and there like that. Lots of little Cosmere references here and there as well that made me happy to notice, because I don't really notice many of those, because this was the first Cosmere book where I really noticed a whole bunch of the references to other stuff. And I know that there are references in some of the books that I've read, I just didn't catch them, at least my first time through. So, yeah, Tress is going to be the one that made me happy. We're down to the last handful of questions now, so this one is my favorite adaptation that I experienced this year. So this one's a little weird because I did not watch any adaptations for the first time this year, as far as I'm aware anyway. I don't watch a lot of movies, I don't watch a lot of TV shows, so I'm going to go with a somewhat less conventional pick here and pick a video game. So my pick is going to be Hogwarts Legacy. This is the new Harry Potter video game. I have not really read Harry Potter. I've seen the movies a couple times. Well, I've seen the first 3 like a dozen times, and I've seen the rest of them twice because my wife and I try to rewatch them, but we inevitably get stuck in a loop of just watching the first 3 over and over again. But I have not read the books. I've listened to a little bit of them on audiobook, but I haven't read through them from beginning to end. So this one, that may slightly invalidate this, but still, my favorite thing based on a book that was not a book that I experienced this year was Hogwarts Legacy, which I've still been playing recently. I only started it not too long ago, and I'm having a good time with it. It's a very good, you know, if you are a fan of Harry Potter, I think you are going to really enjoy it, because it does feel very immersive in that world and everything. Does some things, or rather it doesn't do some things that I was really hoping it would do. I was hoping it would be more of a kind of student at Hogwarts simulator, rather than being that for the first few hours and then basically just becoming your typical open world game. But it is a lot of fun. I'm really enjoying it. So that's what I'm going to pick for that. The next question is one that is a bit different, but it is the favorite video that I have done on this channel this year. So this one was a little difficult for me to pick because there were a couple that I particularly enjoyed, but I'm going to say my favorite is my top 10 Star Wars books video, which is one of my more popular videos. I had a lot of fun making that video. I basically recorded it on a whim because it was like May 3rd, and I was like, oh, I should do a top 10 Star Wars books for May 4th. And so I just threw together a list and I recorded the video. But I do really like that video. I'm very proud of it, and I am glad that it does as well as it has. Second to last question here now, the most beautiful book that I bought this year. My book buying this year has been pretty minimal. I haven't bought a whole lot of books, but I'm going to say my favorite, which I'm not able to show my copy of it at the moment, but my favorite ones that I own, that I got this year, was the Percy Jackson box set that I got, which I love for a few reasons. First of all, I love the covers on these books. I think they look amazing. And also, they have that design on the spine that makes one image when you put them side by side, which is something that I just love. And the final question for this tag is, what are my goals for reading this year? What is something that I absolutely am planning to do? There's a couple that I could list for this. I hope to get through a very significant portion of my TBR, because it is very, very long at the moment. It was down to like 30 something, and then all of Will White's books went for free on Kindle, so then I picked all those up. Now it's like 60. But I'm hoping to get through a good chunk of my TBR by the end of the year. So that's kind of a more broad goal, but for specifics, I hope to get at least most of the way, if not finish, the Star Wars New Jedi Order series, and the same for the Cosmere. I hope to be at least mostly caught up on the Cosmere by the end of the year. The only ones that I'm thinking, I may not get to is maybe the Lost Metal, because I want to get that in paperback, because all my other Mistborn books are in paperback. And I may actually get the new set that's coming out, because those look very nice. As well as the last 2 secret projects, because I don't know if I will be able to get my hands on those or not. And the 4th one doesn't even come out, I think, until next year for the regular mass market version. But those are my 2 main goals. But anyways, that is pretty much it for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed doing something a little different, but I thought it would be a little bit of fun. Let me know down in the comments what you thought of my picks, and if you have any picks for any of these questions, let me know down in the comments below for those as well. And that is pretty much it for this video, so thank you all for watching, and I will see you guys next time.